Life by Design, the podcast for chiropractors. Here's your host, Dr. Jamie Richards.
Welcome to Life by Design for chiropractors, the voice of reason in chiropractic. I'm Dr. Jamie Richards. On today's episode, we bring in Dr. Mike Gibson, one of our Life by Design directors, and we dig into the topic of referability and creating an environment for referability. And, a lot of people really judge the success of their practice on how many referrals they get, which I think is a great thing in conjunction with an external marketing program. Today, we talked about why referrals are so valuable. We talked about the 4 pillars of referability that you absolutely have to have in place in order to create that environment, the rules that need to be there. And then we have an interesting conversation about the character traits of a referee. Who should refer, who will refer, and how do you maximize people actually taking that step and telling other people about what you do. So enjoy today's episode of Life by Design for chiropractors. Welcome to Life by Design for chiropractors, Mike.
Thanks for having me back.
Hey, yeah, this is a regular occurrence now, kind of back and forth between you, Dr. Crashow, John Minardi, Dan Sullivan, bring lots of good guests on the show, but always good to get back to home and have our regular Life by Design crew here. And today we're digging into the concept of referrals. I think this is a conversation that's interesting, and it's going to go in a lot of different directions, but we're going to give you guys not just the reason why referrals are great, but we're going to give you some strategies. And I'm not talking about tactics, ask people for referrals at the table and things like that. And we'll definitely touch on those in today's topic. But, what I'm getting at really is giving you some rules and some habits that are going to maximize and create an environment for referability. So that's how we want to think about this today. Mike, give us an overview of just referring in general. I know you were talking before about, why referrals are so great.
Yeah, well, actually, this is really timely, and I was really glad to be talking about this topic today because one of the things that we noticed in the last half of last year in our practice, after looking at our statistics in our success surveillance system, was that our referrals had actually taken a dip. So when we reviewed everything at the end of the year and we were looking to try and create a good plan moving forward in 2016, this is one of the things that was really high on our list, is to see those numbers grow again. And part of that, of course, is, like you said, because referrals are really, really valuable. And I've heard people try and put a number on it before, like, one referral is worth 3 people who came to you from a screening or online or what have you. I'm not sure if those are really realistic or accurate, but what I do know for sure is that, referrals are always going to be your best new person. And
right.
Part of that is because, you always hear the saying, people hang out and like people like them. So if you have a whole bunch of ideal practice members in your practice, you like them, you enjoy them, they get it, then it's very likely that their friends, the people that they're telling about your practice, they're likely very much like them. And so they'll likely fall into that ideal category again. And secondarily, I think the other big thing is that when you're talking about bringing a new person in, you've got to bring that, build that trust and that loyalty. And of course, one of the most effective ways, and Dr. Robert Cialdini talks about this all the time, is that if you can have someone else start that conversation and introduce you, that significantly increases the loyalty and trust right from the beginning.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think that, it's interesting, depending on what circles you roll in and what business, models and coaching, and especially in chiropractic, we often hear about, how external marketing is so great. And I mean, we are 1,000% on board with external marketing. We're not suggesting by any means that, we should be wearing it as a badge of honor that we have a referral only practice, correct?
Yes. And that's something that, for the first probably 10 years of my practice, I stupidly, thought, my practice is so great because it's 85% referrals and I'm spending next to no money on, external marketing. And I look back and think just how stupid that was. Because, there's no reason that you can't use these same principles and apply it to external marketing to, build trust and loyalty before they
right.
decide to come into your practice. So yes, that absolutely is one of those myths, and one that I certainly abided by for the first, chunk of my practice.
Right. So today we're going to talk then about 4 basic concepts. Number 1 is going to be just the importance of you as a human being and who you are, and some of the habits and rules that exist in there. Then we're going to talk about the experience in your practice and why this is so important. And we'll give you 5 specific individual pieces that you need to understand in terms of the experience, delivering results, which is obviously a big one. And then one that I think gets overlooked, and that's the actual referee, the person who is, giving the referral, and what are their characteristics and traits, and, should everybody refer? Will everybody refer? Should we feel bad if somebody doesn't refer? Should we force them or make them feel bad if they're not referring? I know the old, Reggie Gold line was, don't you have any friends? You've been coming here for 3 months and you've had these great results. You haven't told anybody. Don't you have any friends? And, we can laugh about that, but I think you have to understand the individual person and what some of their characteristic traits are as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, this is something in our practice that we've really been studying. We've actually been doing some book reports and doing as much research as we can. And I think you've nailed them there. As those are really the big 4 factors when you really break it down that will really drive referrals. So if you can really master these 4 things we're going to talk about today, I think that, you're definitely going to increase the amount of referrals you're getting in your practice.
You got it. You're welcome. So let's talk about number 1, you. And, I think every conversation starts here. I remember a mentor of mine would say, who you are as a person precedes who you are as a chiropractor. And I think that that's a really powerful statement. I think that's, at the core of everything. So you can have systems. So, for example, we teach people a Life by Design standard system. But, if the person doesn't have confidence and certainty and hasn't developed their self-esteem, yes, they'll do better with a system than they will without one, but they'll do even better if the person delivering the system, feels good about themselves, is confident, and is certain in what they're describing. Here's a question, Mike. Going back, you talked about early on having so many referrals. Do you think that there was ever an issue where, this was at play in your own practice early on where, because I know you had systems and I know you were getting referrals, but as you developed your self-esteem and certainty in chiropractic, did you see a direct correlation there?
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I can just think back and I was anything but certain or confident or, did I have, I think I always had healthy self-esteem. I don't think I had, self-esteem that I have today to have those discussions that we need to have with people. Right. I was certainly concerned about what many of my patients and practice members would think of things that I would say. So that definitely played a part. And yeah, I've always been good at having a system in place and having, referability systems in my practice. But I absolutely, you're 100% correct in the sense that those systems became even more effective with every year I was at practice and with every year that my confidence and my certainty around chiropractic. And I think we can all relate because we come out of school and sure, we're taught that chiropractic can do these things and have this effect on people. But I know for me, until I really started to see it, that's when it really became real and my certainty and confidence started to really rise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I know for sure. That's the same experience I've had. I know a lot of people, that we talk to, listen to the show, send us messages, have the same issue. So, I think digging into the 6 pillars of self-esteem is always a good starting point for sure for people to, understand some of those concepts. And no matter what else you're doing, that's the overarching theme we want you to understand is who you are, as a person, your self-esteem, all those things are going to be the foundation upon which all these other things get put into place. So the second one is your communication skills. And this is, I think there's a skills and capabilities aspect of this, but also, again, this is propped up by somebody's self-esteem. So you can be a great communicator, but if you don't have the self-esteem to communicate what it is you want to say, then, you have a big problem. So in terms of referability, one of the things that you have to be able to do is communicate to a practice member, what it is you do and what makes that different and what the value is to that person. And, there's nuances and there's an art form to communicating to somebody in a way that drives referability. So, you're speaking through the person at the table in many cases. I know one of the tips that I like to give people is if you're in an open concept area, for example, let's say person on table 2 has children who aren't coming into the practice and person on table 1 has children who are coming into the practice. My conversation with the person on table 1 is about how great it is that their children are getting checked, what great results they've had. I'm probing them, asking them questions and getting them in a third party way to describe the experience not just so they get reinforced in that, but so the person on table 2 recognizes the value in that. And so, I mean, there's a million communication strategies to maximize referability, but you have to be able to talk about this stuff and lead people to where you want them.
And if I could just kind of piggyback on that, because what you said is absolutely critical. What I'll also add is that it has to be done, your communication strategies have to provide your patients with a simple way that they can communicate with their friends and family. It's one thing for them to understand and get what you're doing. It's another thing for them to feel confident enough and have a story, if I can use that term, have a story that they can tell their friends and family that their friends and family are going to understand. So I think there's 2 parts of it. It's one, having the ability to communicate so that they can understand it and make a decision to continue with their care and go through the process. It's a whole nother to be able to give them the tools and the communication strategies to be able to share it with others.
Yeah, I think that goes, we're going to blend in a little bit of this, I think, with the brand in terms of part of your brand story ties into this well. And I know in our practice, and we use core problems and talk a lot about core problems with the spine, collateral damage. And it's really, I think it's fascinating to watch the science of it unfold in terms of, that understanding psychology. And, when you start to hear people in your practice use your words and your language, I mean, it definitely gives you goosebumps and gets you excited. But, I had a story not too long ago, a young practice member, 10 years old, and she was talking to me about her corrections that we're making with her spine and using the language. And her father actually said, hey, you notice how she knows your whole language now. So it's just, I think it's interesting that when you take the time to detail out a proprietary process, simplify it and turn it into a story that, people can communicate, then, it's going to be much easier for them to tell that story.
Totally agree.
So let's talk about the referability habits or the referability rules. And these are kind of interesting. I like these in the sense that, you can put all the requirements in place. And, we've talked numerous times about the 4 requirements: leadership, team, system, and communication. And, you have to have those 4 requirements of any successful business put into place. And these rules really are about creating an environment for referability. And, here's the idea. You can be great. You can deliver great results. You can have the right people in your practice. You can have self-esteem, communication skills. But, if you're not nice to people, for example, people aren't going to refer to you. Or if they do refer to you, it'll only be in an extreme situation. So, let's say someone, is like, I really need the best chiropractor around. And, Bill is over here in the corner. He knows that from a results perspective, it very well could be you, but, he knows that you're, a little rough around the edges, or you're not, pleasant maybe on every single visit. So he's going to hold off referring to you, or he might in a really extreme situation refer to you, but he's going to refer to you with a caveat. He's kind of a jerk, or, he's not always that nice. And so you got to be really careful about creating an environment for referability. So let's talk about some of these rules. And I think a lot of them are second nature, you would think. I mean, they're going to be common sense, but I think having them down in a document for yourself and making them part of your team training, you can ask yourself, is my team doing this? So I'll talk about them, Mike, and then I'll let you comment on any ones you want to when we get through this. So the first one is going to be show up every time. And that just means you need to show up with tons of energy, tons of excitement. These people who are coming into your practice, might be the only exposure they have to your message or your model. So you got to show up every time. And that means if you have stuff going on in your life, if you're dealing with your own challenges, you got to leave that stuff at the door. You can't bring that in with you. And, it's my father-in-law says this all the time. You got to wipe your feet at the door. And, you can pick up all your junk on the way out if you want to. And, it's not going anywhere. So when you're in practice, you have to, you got to bring it, and you have to show up every single time. The second one is you need to show up on time. Now, this isn't always an easy one for me, so this is why it's on my list, is showing up on time. That means if you have a pre-shift meeting, be there for the pre-shift meeting. If you're doing a post-shift, be there for the post-shift. If you tell somebody you're going to be at an appointment at a certain time, then be there at that time. And this one here is so, you think second nature, but even on a good team, I think that this one can pushed away, because it's something where when you're really busy and you're flying around, you're taking care of people, things start rocking. It's a lot of fun, but saying hello, saying goodbye, saying please, saying thank you, saying you're welcome. And I noticed for myself, a lot of times people would say thank you, and I didn't actually say you're welcome. I'd say, okay, great, have a great day, we'll see you next Thursday. And they're like, oh, thank you so much. I'm like, you got it. And there's something to be said about acknowledging their thank you with a you're welcome. And this is the idea of someone giving you a gift. There's something in it for the gift giver as well. So when someone says thank you, acknowledge them, look them in the eye, say you're welcome, say hello, say please. And that's one of the trademarks of our team is we say hello and goodbye every single visit. And I don't care if I have 10 staff, it wouldn't matter. Everybody's job is to say hello and goodbye to every single person on every single visit. The next one is do what you say. And I think this is one that probably lots of docs miss. An easy strategy is to have a notepad at your station. And when I say I'm going to do something for somebody, I do it. So I'll give you an example. Yesterday in practice, I had a list of things that I said I would do for people. So whether it was getting them a referral to another chiropractor, whether it was sending them research or an article, I just write that stuff down. And then this morning, I took the time to send those out to everybody. What does it say if you let somebody know, oh yeah, I'll get you that article, and then a week goes by, 2 weeks go by, and they have to come back to you and say, oh, hey, can I get that article? Versus the next day in their inbox, there it is coming from you. It just creates that environment where they know that not only you're the best, but you're going to do everything possible to make sure that they get what they need. Finish what you start. Always provide value. Right? Every time you interact with somebody, how can I provide value to this person? Every email interaction, every phone interaction, every personal interaction, how can I provide value? And then the last ones, be honest and be authentic. And this one, I think, really comes into play when you're giving recommendations. I think we need to give people honest recommendations. I had this conversation, Mike, yesterday with my mechanic. And we always joke around about how similar his business is to our Life by Design Center. And one of the similarities we were talking about was how a lot of mechanics, when you go, will do one of two things. They'll either go overboard and tell you all these things that need to be fixed, and it's going to cost all this money. And I think a lot of people have unfortunately had that experience. But a lot of times they'll go the other direction. They won't tell you what needs to be done because they're afraid, that's going to cost too much money. And so in order to gain your business, they'll say, yeah, you know what, just do this little piece over here, and it's only going to cost you that much. And at the time, the client thinks, wow, this guy's great. He's not like every other mechanic. He's only telling me to do this, until 3 weeks later when your car's not working. And you got to go back, and it costs more money. So we were just, talking about being honest with people about what's really happening and letting them make the decision. And then the last rule that I'll give you, Mike, is be kind, be pleasant, and smile. There's something powerful about really nice people. You ever hang out with people who are just so nice? And that doesn't mean you're a pushover. It just means you're such a nice, pleasant person that people want to be around you. If you combine that with the things we're talking about today, man, you're creating an environment that is almost off the chart in terms of referability.
Love those. Those are great, and they seem so simple or so kind of automatic, or they should be automatic as you read through them. But I think we all need to be ever conscious of it. I might even suggest that it'd be great for everyone to make a list of these, and then print them out and put them somewhere where you're going to see them before you start every day in practice. Jimmy, there was 3 of them that really stood out to me, and part of it was because of the importance you've already explained, so I won't reiterate that. But I think why they also stood out to me is because I think a lot of people, and some people will cringe at this, but I think it's the truth, is that some people still, when they go to their chiropractor, they're still comparing it and contrasting it to a visit to any other medical professional.
Right.
And so these 3 stand out to me because I think these are 3 areas that we can really separate and differentiate ourselves and can really make a bold impression, because we are going to act in total contradiction to what they're going to experience at their medical doctor. And the first one is show up on time, and not just show up on time, but maybe as an extension of that is that people aren't waiting for an hour and a half in your office.
Right.
But we have this thing in our office where we it's one of our promises is that everyone will be seen within 15 minutes of their appointment time. So that's something that I think is really, really important. People, when they come in and get out quickly, that is something that wows them because they, put an hour and a half on their schedule because that's how long it takes for them to go to their medical doctor. Of course, they quickly learn that we're on time, but the first time, that's a real shock to people.
Sure it is.
The next one, I think, and this is something that I vividly remember. I don't remember what caused the shift, but at some point, I think there's a strong contrast to the medical profession. Of course, I'm lumping them all together here, but I think there's this idea that we have to always be so thankful when seeing our medical doctor, and what I think is so important, and I love that you included this, is that we need to start saying thank you to our patients and our practice members and thanking them for choosing our office. They could have gone anywhere else. We need to say thank you to them. It's not just that we're the doctor and so they should feel privileged to have been able to see us. We need to thank them for their business and their trust. And I think that's a really critical thing. And I think that really kind of surprised people. They're like, I like what you said, say you're welcome, but then follow it up and say, thank you too. I really appreciate you being here today. That will go a really, really long way. And then the last one, as you said it, and I guess we're a lot alike in many ways. I have my little pad of paper right beside my table at practice, and I write my notes down. And I think if I can just pause or reiterate one thing that I think is so critical is not just the follow through, but I love what you said about the quick follow through. So I try and do it that night before I leave practice. Part of that's productivity so that I can get it done and get it off my plate. Right. But also I want to make an impression. They're like, wow, he said he was going to do this. He followed through, which is amazing. But he followed through. Like I just told him this an hour ago. Like that just totally blows them away. And I think that really, really makes a strong impression. And it's that unexpected, over-the-top experience that's going to encourage them to start telling their friends and family.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. So, Mike, kind of segueing from that, the second pillar here that we're talking about is the experience in general. What do you say about the experience? I know there's 5 things that you think are really important in that, if you can touch on those.
Yeah, for sure. And again, this goes back, and you mentioned it in the beginning, that you'll see this common thread, and this is why we have the 4 requirements. So, these are very much part of the requirements. But you mentioned, your brand. It's very important that you have a brand and that it is, consistent through everything that you do. Also, within that is the power and the importance of differentiating yourself, especially in a marketplace where, unfortunately, chiropractic has, such a negative perspective or connotation or feeling generated within so many of so much of the public. I think it's really important that you differentiate yourself from traditional chiropractic or what they may have experienced in the past. So I think that's really, really powerful. And that goes a long way when they start to have discussions with their friends and family who may have those negative feelings, because what you can do then, and you can train your patients to do, is say, no, he's different. He doesn't do this, he does this. And that can go a long way in encourage, not just for someone to refer, but also having the person who's being referred actually follow through on that suggestion. I think value, you mentioned, is a big one, making sure that, there's unexpected value. You go out of your way to provide more value than is expected. So added value, like even just like you mentioned, offering that article, that's added value that is really going to help promote referrals. I think the physical environment matters. I think the feeling they get in your physical space, the emotions and the feelings that it creates when they step inside, and then as really all of this is really a system, and you need to have systems in place, not only systems for referrals, but more important, systems for everything, so that's a consistent experience every single time.
Yeah, no, I think that really is a nice synopsis of having the experience. And it all keeps having that common thread all the way through of creating this, overall, it's almost like creating fertile ground, this just creating a place where referability is commonplace. And people feel comfortable referring, not only because they understand and they know, but because they feel like it's somewhere they can send somebody. Remember, when people are referring, it really is a reflection upon them. So you may love a restaurant, you love their food, but you hate their service. As much as you love their food, you're probably not going to tell a lot of people about it, even though the food is amazing, because you don't want that to reflect poorly on you. So that leads us to number 3, talking about the food being amazing. If your care is amazing and you're getting great results, now let's just preface this when I say results and I talk about a third paradigm type model, I'm talking about measurable objective results. So people are seeing that they're becoming less subluxated, that their system is becoming more functional, and they may have subjective results that come along with that, but it's not necessarily the case. We have lots of people in our practice and many of the other offices that people have objective results, no subjective results, and they still tell other people because of the objective changes that they're getting. But the point is, you have to be getting results. You can have a great environment, be a great person, but if you're terrible at what you do and you don't deliver the goods, people aren't going to refer to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes, I think I'll say this, and I feel like I'm kind of dating myself here, but I think it's something that is often we don't spend enough time on anymore. Maybe it's just because I've been away from practice and that's the way it feels to me, but I don't think that we're spending enough time becoming masters of our craft and really getting, we have this kind of thing in our office, this theme is that we're results crazy.
Right.
We want to see the results again, as you described it, as in terms of the objective measurements that we're taking, but we need to get results. At the end of the day, that's the most important thing, and we're going to do whatever we have to do to ensure that we're getting results because that's the right thing to do. But also in the context of this conversation, that is absolutely a key factor in determining how many people are referring to you.
Yeah, no question. And then share those results. So the person who's under your hands and getting examined and getting the results, that's wonderful. But there's ways to, share those. And in a lot of the Life by Design offices, Mike, we use the picture holding the whiteboard with the 3 benefits that they've got. And we plaster those all over the practice. So, ours are all over the wall. They're up in the front of the office when people walk by at street level. And I know in your office, the entire hallway is basically plastered with success stories of people getting results. And then the other way that we share our objective results is we have a case of the week, a biostructural restoration case of the week. And I actually take pre and post images and share them along with some of the subjective benefits that people got. And so design that into a nice graphic. And if you go to the Life by Design for Chiropractors Facebook page, Mike, I think we shared one of the ones from my office not too long ago. So people should be able to see that on there.
Yeah, it is there. I did see it.
Okay, perfect. So the final one, Mike, talk about this one. I think this is kind of the missing link is you can do all this stuff great, but you might come across and just be working with someone who is just not in their nature to refer.
Yeah, this is a really fascinating one, and I encourage everyone to just dig around on Google, do some research, and really help just kind of get clear and understand some of the research that's been done around the personality and the character traits and the type of person that actually refers, because it's not everyone who refers. And I think just to provide a very obvious example, someone who's a very expressive entrepreneur, say, versus maybe a young man or woman who's new to town, maybe not with the best self-esteem. Those are 2 very different people that are going to create totally different amounts of referrals, and it's very likely that that younger person with lower self-esteem is likely never going to refer. Right. Even if they love your service, they've gotten great results, they're just not very likely to do that. It's not in their personality, despite of how great a service and experience you've created for them. Whereas you could have provided a far less than masterful experience for that expressive entrepreneur, but it's just part of who they are to go out and tell everyone about you, because part of it, because they're an entrepreneur and they understand that that's what drives business, and they're hoping that you're going to reciprocate, but also that's just part of who they are. That's just, their social nature. So there's some really fascinating research out there. I encourage you to Google that a little bit and start to learn and understand that a little bit more, because I think it can help you focus your efforts on those people in your practice who fit those profiles. So I think you can kind of maybe more of an advanced technique, but I think something that you could take advantage of and really start to identify who those people are and start that type of relationship with them.
I agree 100%. I think, we've covered a lot of really important pieces on today's topic. And everybody would love more referrals. It's, I think, a great stream of people in your practice. As you alluded to, they're typically great people, especially if you're cultivating pre-qualified, educated people who understand what you do and they value it. More of those people is always a good thing, in conjunction with an external marketing program that brings in more pre-qualified people, which leads to more referrals. So it really is a feedback cycle that goes on and on and on. So today we talked about the importance of you and your self-esteem. We talked about the referability rules. the experience in your practice, getting results, and then just the referee themselves. So lots to get today, guys. You can go in the show notes and grab a lot of this stuff. We'll have links to anything that we talked about today, as well. We'll have a download there for you with the highlights from today's episode, so you don't have to go back and listen to this over and over and try and write it down. You can just listen and actually take that in and come up with some action steps and strategies to get this stuff in your office and out to your practice and start getting the results. So thank you for listening to Life by Design for Chiropractors, the voice of reason in chiropractic.